If we can just go, hello everybody and welcome to this session on food in schools at SLF. The usual courtesies apply. If you can turn your microphones off when you're not speaking, and for bandwidth issues, can we ask that everybody turns their video off as well when unless you're going to speak. We have the chat pane down the side, and if people could actually use that for any discussion. We have a recorded presentation to play to you, but we'll monitor the chat as we go through, and any questions that arise through that, or at the end, we'll be able to follow those up later on. There's also somebody there who will monitor for any issues around technicalities. So if you have any technical issues, please put that in there as well, and we'll be able to pick that up. If you lose connection, for example, if you actually just go out and try and come back in, sometimes, as we know, that will work, sometimes it doesn't. But if you have a go, that will help. But there'll be somebody online to help as well. So this is a recorded presentation that we're going to give around food in schools. I hope you'll find it interesting, and at the end of it, we will have time for discussion and a little feedback. If you just bear with me. Hello and welcome to this session where we'll be taking a look at the revised nutritional regulations for food in schools and at a self-evaluation framework, food in schools across Scotland. I'm joined by Jerry Donaghy, who manages the school catering services in South Lanarkshire, and Emma McFarlane, HNI, with particular experience working with children and young people with additional support needs. We also have a couple of clips from Leslie Kirkwood, who until recently was one of the health and nutrition inspectors with Education Scotland. So if I begin with the nutritional requirements for food in schools in Scotland, you'll be aware that there has been a review undertaken over the last year or two, and that revised regulations took effect from April 2021. So the revised regulations take account of the latest scientific evidence and dietary advice on food, health and nutrition, and they're closely aligned to Scotland's dietary goals. So the new nutritional requirements, they're accessible online, and you can look up Scottish Government, Education Scotland, or you can just Google them. If you put in Healthy Eating in Schools Guidance 2020 Scotland, you'll find them. The recommended bedtime reading, they'll do the trick. They're really important. We feel passionately about them, actually, those of us that work with food in schools. So the other thing we wanted to mention a wee bit about was food in schools across Scotland, the self-evaluation framework. Jerry, do you want to explain a wee bit about that? Because you were, of course, involved in the development of it.
I was, and thanks Shirley, I was along with the other catering and education colleagues. It's a digital framework, a tool if you like, that offers a way to find out what is working well and what could be improved about food provision. Food as a context for learning and the food experience of children and young people in school settings. It uses robust evidence, and that's the key in evaluating quality, and the framework follows the format of How Good Is Our School that will be all too familiar to educators. Gathering evidence to look closely at aspects of school work around food helps support a better understanding between actions taken and the impact these have on children and young people's health and well-being. Leslie Kirkwood will explain a bit about the background to the framework.
So we did. We thought, if How Good Is Our School is already a framework that education colleagues are familiar with, and catering colleagues less familiar with, but they are aware of it through school inspections. They know that the framework exists. So we thought, well, let's look at that and see how we can adapt it to make it kind of focusing on food in schools. Again, we worked with our colleagues on this. It wasn't just, we felt the main focus had to be the Health Promotion and Nutrition Act, but we also understand that there are other aspects to the work in schools that support that, the food in schools across Scotland. So it was to try and not lose sight of those things. So if we looked at the homepage, if we just had a quick look at that, you'd be able to see how we've broken that down. So we have the kind of homepage, we've got an area on the background, we've got the quality indicators, and there are drop-down sub-menus in each of those tabs. We've also got a resources page as well to help people understand the kind of bigger picture around self-evaluation, but also we'll put some resources in there to help people start discussions, see that bigger picture, and we'll continue to update that as things progress, and we'll put in kind of the most current links. So again, just thinking about the format of it, why we initially started with a paper document and moved to an online resource was so we can keep it current, but also so we can get input from people who are actually using the framework and doing the work, and kind of working with them to populate things into the resource as we go along. So as I say, the quality indicators were given a kind of bit of background and an explanation as to what that quality indicator covers. And then for each of the quality indicators, we've got sections on how we would gather the evidence and where you might find that evidence. We would analyse the evidence, and then we would evaluate it. So each quality indicator goes through the same process. And again, it's just trying to reinforce that there is a process there, follow the process, and it'll help you find the answers that you're looking for. We've tried to kind of debunk some myths around what it is and isn't. And I'd say the whole thing has been trying to support improvement and understanding in the system.
So Leslie mentioned about a tools and resources section, and that the framework's not about educators only. So if you think about who you would expect to see being involved in working with this framework, everybody, as I've said before, everybody involved with food in school has a role to play in reflecting upon the quality of that food provision, and making things better, be that food, whether it's breakfast time, nurture groups, lunchtime, food used in practical cooking activities or in enterprise activities. And that will involve all support staff in school, teachers, catering staff, and it would be important to also maybe engage there with some of your partners, whether that be parents or food providers, or it could be a local allotment group, RET, the Royal Highland Educational Trust. All these kind of people will be your partners in terms of food in schools, and it would be important to engage with all of them to look at the quality of what it is you're providing in terms of food as a context for learning, or the food experience for children, young people. So the experience of different staff groups could give quite a varied, could be quite varied. So the framework includes a section with suggestions on how you might work together with different people, because different people will have a different experience of self-evaluation. But it gives examples of what a successful joined-up approach to self-evaluation could look like, drawing on that expertise from different people. The framework also uses language that's inclusive, language that everyone can access to help them see the role that they have to play and the role that others have to play. The worry when we were putting this together, you might remember, Jerry, was that the language might be exclusive. It might turn people off, some of the sort of very technical things, and I completely get that. So we tried really hard to make sure that the language would include everybody and that everybody could see where they fitted within this process. And it's important that nobody sees that what they do is separate from that collective contribution here. So Leslie's going to explain a wee bit more about a couple of the other resources included within the framework.
But I think there's two resources in particular which I think are really useful. And we also talk about potential starting points for people. So you don't have to jump in at the first QI that's listed. It's about stepping back and having a think about, well, let's have an honest discussion around where we are. And one of the resources, there are two sketch notes, but one of them looks at kind of food in schools in the round, and it helps people maybe identify where their role might be, but it also helps them see the role of others. And I think that initial discussion around, well, what does it mean, and how does it make a difference, and well, are we as good as we think we are, and how do we know that? It's those sort of things, and I think it's about being open and honest about having a conversation to say, well, if we think we are there, what evidence do we have to back that up? And getting people to recognise that they do have something to contribute to this, and allowing them to do that and be heard, and not being afraid of those conversations, because we might hear things that we don't want to hear, but maybe we need to hear them. And it's help people not be defensive about what they're doing, but have maybe more confidence that what they're doing is the right thing, and listening to the views of others if they maybe need to make changes. But I think the sketch notes in particular are a great kind of visual representation of what it could look like.
I can certainly see how the sketch notes could be used to stimulate great conversations, actually. But also it shows how everyone's voices need to be heard. To answer that question that Leslie posted, and this is one that I think we've talked about before within in the area of school food, are we as good as we think we are? And it's that question of if we think we're good, but is good really good enough? How can it be better? What do we need to look at to make things better in schools? And Jerry, from your perspective as a school catering service manager, how do you see school catering staff being involved in evaluating the quality of that delivery of food in schools as part of a whole school approach?
The catering staff are really my eyes and ears on the ground in relation to evaluating what menu items are popular among pupils, and in turn, those menu items that are not so popular. I receive regular feedback from catering staff, who on many occasions are parents, who raise issues that result in menu modifications if required. They're also responsible for dealing with any food quality issues by completing supplier complaint forms, which result in myself liaising with suppliers to rectify any faults. And the catering staff are also trained to encourage pupils to try different menu items in relation to different textures, tastes, and healthy options. Another way the catering staff evaluate the quality of food is that food waste is monitored on a daily basis, and also provides a guide to unpopular menu items so that we can change them as soon as possible. To ensure that all schools are providing the same quality of food and presentation, each school is issued with photographic menu packs and classroom planners, and they act as a discussion poster within classrooms and the dining room. And in order to give catering staff and education support staff and teaching staff an overview of the revised regulations and what they mean for schools, we provided an online course summarising the revised regulations to give everybody an equal understanding of the part we all play. We shared this with 16 other local authorities throughout Scotland because it was so popular.
I think I remember seeing some of those menu packs, the photographic menu packs and planners, and when I was in one of your schools actually some time ago. But that training that you've offered as well, I know you sent it to me to have a look at, and I've worked through it, and that was such a helpful thing for just getting everybody focused on looking at the same food and drink standards to make sure that everybody understood and everybody was clear on what the standards were and where they would apply. It's great piece of work, really innovative. And great to hear that other authorities are perhaps picking that up as well. So for people listening to this, maybe they need to ask their authorities themselves whether or not they have access to that. And thinking about how education and catering staff might work together to reflect their different roles in food provision and food as a context for learning. Emma, have you got anything you would like to add at this point?
As Jerry mentioned, I think it is important an aspect of working together is to understand the role each member of staff has and how that reflects and relates to food in school. Where do we or could we naturally cross over to support each other to deliver these key messages around the importance and the value of food in schools? Thinking about using the framework in relation to staff working together, the new Food in School framework sits well alongside HIGIS and can support schools to work together to evaluate their practice across the quality indicators to identify their strengths, pinpoint areas for development, and use this knowledge to shape their improvement agenda. As each school is different, the context and the importance of that context and being context-driven will support schools to prioritise improvements and select the most relevant quality indicators to support their work. And like HIGIS, those quality indicators are all designed to be interconnected and will impact naturally on each other. But fundamentally, everyone has a role to play in improvement. The framework places importance on ensuring that schools adopt that collaborative approach to self-evaluation and to make connections with all stakeholders in the process. In that instance, it supports us to really consider the roles of our catering staff and our catering teams, educators, support staff, wider school staff, children and young people, parents, local communities, and partners, and how we can work together to bring about improvement and develop that whole school approach. So how can staff work collaboratively together? Well, the working together section in the framework highlights a few key areas of what effective practice could look like and support schools to take this forward. And an additional resource, the Food in Schools contribution sketch note, can also offer support and some ideas.
Thanks, Emma. We've heard about the importance of everyone having their say, and how do you both see children and young people being involved in this? Emma?
A really important point, Shirley. Children and young people have a fundamental role to play in relation to food in schools. It's really crucial to ensure that children and young people are engaged and participate in all stages in order to drive that improvement, which directly affects them and the choices that they make. When considering the process of triangulation, schools need to gather strong evidence from a range of sources. They need to gather data, they have to carry out observations and learning walks to get a real lived sense of the experiences of children and young people at the school. But the final part of that triangulation is the school's ability to seek people's views, including those of stakeholders, and very importantly, those of children and young people. And where possible, it's really essential that we do try and include natural spaces for possible groups that are underrepresented, children and young people that really depend on food in schools, those in SIMD 1 to 3, children and young people with potential additional support needs or protected characteristics. It's really important that where possible, we make natural connections for them. With the creation of the right conditions, children and young people have got a unique position to offer us their honest thoughts and their opinions. They'll tell us what they value and what matters most to them. Sometimes we can gather views for children in a bit of a tokenistic way, and we can all become guilty of that. But now, with the inception of the UNCRC and those children's rights in Scots law, and with the support of the WEHIGGI's resources, which have been developed specifically to support learner participation in school self-evaluation, schools can really use these alongside the framework to really support and enhance that gathering of people's voice and hearing those voices of children and young people in a meaningful and relevant way. It's not about what they're saying, it's about what we do with that information, and not just hearing it, but acting upon it, and that really will deliver on their rights.
And from your perspective, Jerry, how would you involve children and young people in supporting you to look at your part in the evaluating provision?
All of these issues are discussed at pupil council meetings, which are attended by my menu development officer. Good example is having our officers visit schools to involve pupils in food activities based around healthy eating, where children and young people are not shy in telling us what they think. They're also very vocal regarding sustainability and want to know how we're working and looking to improve our sustainability regarding food. This is something that we're keen to ensure we cover when planning any food activity with pupils. Pupils also like to know that their views have been considered, so that involving them is really key. And this is where we can work in partnership with our colleagues in education, also by involving suppliers and parents. And the involvement of children and young people is the key to ensure the improvements that have been put in place are really successful.
I think the point you made there about making sure that children and young people know that their views have been heard because they'll see something happen as a result of it, that's really important as well. So it's not just that they're giving their feedback, they're actually seeing the "you said, we did" kind of thing as part of that. Yeah. We mentioned earlier on about the nutritional regulations for food in schools, and compliance with these is required in all school settings, and many of them apply across the whole school day, which means that the catering school meals, school catering provision has to work with the school. I'm thinking of the example of thinking about like the red processed meat, which applies across the full school day. So how do you ensure that all staff know what's expected of them in terms of food provision?
These templates are really joint working documents that cover the whole school provision and record information which supports the implementation of the requirements of the Act. Specific questions are asked and require information to demonstrate compliance with the Act and look to identify areas for improvement and partnership working within the school. In South Lanarkshire, our menu development officer is scheduled to visit all schools during this academic year to meet with health promoting leads and pupils. Catering staff will also know what is expected of them in terms of the food provision, as we ensure that they have extensive training, which not only covers the nutritional regs, but also aspects of the food production, from special diets, allergen management to food and health training. We also have counter standards to remind staff of the importance of presentation and placement of the food, and posters displayed in the dining room highlighting the 14 nutritional standards. We have pictorial menus and catering manager packs which detail all items and standards and can be used as a training tool across the school. As I said earlier, we have also produced the 2 online training programmes which cover the revised regs, and we have shared them right across education and catering staff in South Lanarkshire so that everybody is aware of the regs. The Council's website, Twitter page, Facebook page ran a series of animations highlighting the key changes of the revised regulations so that we can ensure everybody is kept up to date with regular updates. We also send out newsletters every month with any updates. In addition, we also have internal auditors who visit kitchens unannounced to ensure that all requirements are met.
So if we've got people on at the seminar today who are from South Lanarkshire, teaching staff, the chances are that they will either have seen the animations, or they've maybe done online training, or they might have experienced a visit from an auditor in their school as well. Yes, that's really helpful. So that does help pull it all together. Okay. Emma, do you want to just comment on the importance of all school staff being involved in the regulations and decision making around those?
Jerry talks about the need for training and collaboration across the school to meet the standards, which is absolutely important. As it's legislated for, it's important that all school staff are aware of the nutritional regulations. However, the framework really encourages us to take that step forward. It encourages us to really reflect and think about developing a whole school approach to food in our schools. It encourages the schools to develop a shared understanding through the support of its visions and its ethos and its values, and ask the totality of our staff and our partners in and across the school and across that day to consider what the regulations mean to them as a school and as an individual. Now, whether that's as a catering service providing lunch, a teacher delivering a cooking lesson, or an enterprise tuck shop that's running in the background. It's important that the regulations are not just seen as something that are delivered in the dining room, but it asks us to consider, how joined up are we? What messages do we send around food and food choices? And how consistent are we with that message? Does our approaches to our values and our education and the learning and teaching inside our classrooms, do they all complement our food provision? Training needs to be more than just developing knowledge. It needs to be developing knowledge, looking at that theory and making those connections. It has to focus on the aspects of things that may have the biggest impact. And for our school and our context, what are the things that will really make the difference? And in a nutshell, that's what the framework will support you to do as you move forward.
Thank you. So use of the self-evaluation framework in schools will be voluntary. But at the time of so much change with the nutritional regulations, the introduction of additional hours for early learning and childcare, there's new legislation, Jerry, I think mentioned about that, about food allergens, universal free school meals in primary schools are coming in. The framework provides a way to evaluate the effectiveness and the impact of the school's approaches and practice in all of these areas, because they all affect, if you think about what's at the heart of all of this, children, young people, and hopefully providing them with food that meets the nutrient standards, but also inspires them, I think, to make good choices out with school as well. So the HNI team will be using the templates that Jerry mentioned about there as part of inspection evidence gathering before we come to when we're in school, And we would ask that each school completes their own template prior to inspection teams arriving in the school, and that will guide discussions during inspections. And obviously, because of the whole school nature of some of the food and drink standards, that means that they need to be completed together. So I think, Jerry, you've maybe started using some of those already, but it's very clear that there's a section that education have to sign off, and there's a section that the catering service would sign off. So they really have to be done together. So the legislation's in place and the framework provides a method of looking at the quality of food in schools. So let's turn to the question of why it's so important. Why are we looking at all of this? Why has the government put in revised regulations for food in schools? So Leslie shares her thoughts on food in schools and its impact on health, well-being and beyond.
Food, as I said earlier, it's a very emotive subject, and we can use all sort of judgmental language around it. I think we need to step away from that. And I think one of the things about the framework is we try and take the pressure off of, everything happening in the dining hall and it being left to catering, to say, well, actually, let's explore what happens around that. Let's look at food in society culturally. Food in Scotland, what kind of relationship do we have with it? Is it a healthy one? And if not, how do we change it? And when I say healthy, as in it's not detrimental to our health, because we can all have relationships with food which maybe aren't the healthiest. But it's not just about healthy food, it's about a relationship with food. And I think there's some work to be done there. And I think we have to do that more widely. I don't think it can just be around the dining hall. It has to be beyond that, and exploring it and not being afraid to explore it, because I don't think we'll kind of change the narrative around kind of food in Scotland unless we have those conversations, and perhaps challenge our own thinking, challenge children and young people's thinking, not just to accept what's offered, but maybe to demand more and why they need to do that. And just have more rounded conversations about what it is and what how it can add to life. Whether that's growing your own fruit and vegetables or whatever, or think about aspirations for work after school that might be involved in food industry in its widest sense. What does Scotland offer? And internationally, what does it offer? And also look at what's happening around the world in terms of food, and look at the kind of global picture. There's all sorts of things there, looking at climate change, what impact that might have on food, where we source plant-based diets. There's all sorts of things that can be in it, but it's about hooking children and young people in with an interest to it, to say, well, it does apply to you. None of us, we all eat, we all need to eat. So how do we get involved in that in a way that's quite exciting? And in terms of health and well-being, I think it for me, it's always been a kind of no-brainer that what we put into our bodies is really important. And without going into what feeds your brain and all the rest, I think the more and more research that's coming out, I think that's the exciting thing about nutrition research, is that it's growing. There's better methodologies being involved in research, and we're looking at things like what we put in our bodies and how it affects not just our heart, etc., but our brain, our gut, all of these things. And I think that's a hugely exciting thing to be looking at. But it's about getting the basics right in the first place. And if that starts with our relationship with food in this country, then I think that's no bad thing. And hopefully this resource starts some of those conversations with people, and it gives them, as I say, just that scaffolding to build in those conversations.
So Leslie makes some good points. The Scottish Government has committed to the introduction of universal free school meals for primary school children as of 2022. That's not that long away now. And it's renewed its commitment to the Good Food Nation bill. So how are things looking in schools from your perspective? Emma?
The last 18 months have been incredibly challenging for many due to the COVID pandemic. However, in the period of recovery, and as we settle back into our building-based learning, I'm sure the commitment to universal free school meals will be a welcome sign for many schools and families. The provision of nutritious school meals supports us to really look at our priorities of getting it right for all of our children, particularly when we consider the impact of poverty and equity. Moving free school meals into that universal offer will also support our inclusion agendas and support the well-being of those children who may in the past have felt there was a stigma attached to a free school meal. Thinking forward, sometimes when we think things are free, there's a risk that we can undervalue them. So suppose there's a question for us all to think, what will be important for us? How will our school consider what they value as a provision? Is the free school meal valued? And how will that be shown across our school? Jerry, I'm sure things have looked very different for you and your team this year.
Obviously, COVID has had an impact on the service we as caterers have not been able to provide, and it has also affected many families too, who have come to rely on school food and food provision within schools more and more, which is why we need to make sure that going forward, the momentum is really kept up. Universal free school meals is a fantastic opportunity to ensure that all primary school children will receive a daily healthy, balanced, nutritious lunch, and is also great news for school caterers. This will help form good food choices and make a difference to the lives of children in Scotland in terms of health. Partnership working between catering staff and education staff is key and makes the whole school approach much more achievable. And this will certainly benefit children and young people in learning about positive food and drink choices. We are constantly moving forward in the promotion of healthy menus and are always looking at new food items that meet the food regulations to ensure that there is variety and diversity in the menus. The Good Food Bill applies to the whole of Scotland, including school food provision, and the commitment is that everyone in Scotland has access to healthy, nutritious food of high quality. School food is no exception, and we endeavour to make sure that where possible, our food is locally sourced, seasonal and sustainable.
Thank you both, Emma and Jerry, for that. I would say that we're experiencing a period of significant change in terms of both the global and local food picture at the moment. We've got the Good Food Bill, universal free school meals, as was mentioned, as well as nutritional regulations coming in and global sustainability goals. COP26 is coming along, and I'm sure food will be a focus of discussion during that as well. The food shortages experienced in the early days of COVID resulted in significant focus on food production in this country. The National Farmers Union has said that it's committed to making farming carbon neutral in this country. And recent reports are highlighting food transportation issues around the country and beyond due to lack of HGV drivers or just issues with accessing the food that we require, particularly thinking about that school setting. It's a picture of real change just now, but we've got the carbon dioxide discussion going on just now for packaged food. Makes us think more about we should be using less perhaps of the processed packaged food, more reliance on fresh foods. But now more than ever, I think this is a really exciting and interesting period for food to be a focus of a context for learning. I hope this has given you some thoughts to be thinking about around food in schools. Jerry, myself and Emma are here now. If there are any questions anybody would like to particularly ask. I'm sorry, I haven't been able to see the chat, so I don't know what's actually been coming through there. But if anybody has any questions to ask, would you put your hand up or just click on your camera and ask now? Sorry, I see Denise is asking, saying that the recording will be available. That's great. I wasn't aware of that, so that's fantastic. Thank you. If there's no specific questions coming out just now, you can still get in touch with any of us who were involved in the presentation today. And give us feedback on that or ask questions about the different roles that we have in that. But one of the things I would like to ask everybody from a school setting to do is just in the chat to actually indicate what your role is within a school or the setting in which you work. Would like to know what people will do. You haven't had a lot of time to think about it, I know, but would be interested in what people will do as a result of attending today. But more importantly for us as a bit of feedback, we would like to know what further support you feel would be helpful, particularly in schools, to fully embed the nutritional regulations across the school day, and also to think about how you might use the self-evaluation framework in your setting. So it would be helpful to get any feedback on that, because that will give us something that we can take away from today and actually build on. Emma and Jerry, if there's anything you would want to add, please do. No.
Other than we're all in this together, and if we help each other, we'll get there, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that came out really strongly in the discussions, that the inputs that you had, Emma, talking about partnership working, and I think, Jerry, you came back to it many times, and at the end there in summing up, yeah, I think that what we wanted to come across through the self-evaluation framework was exactly that this is not something that can be neatly packaged and landed on the doorstep of the school catering service. It has to be something that's taken across a full, a whole school, and to some extent a local authority as well. There is no one person responsible for this, and when you think about all the different people in school and in education who are involved in food in any way, shape or form, everybody has a role to play in actually making sure it's the best it can be, but also that it's delivering on the best outcomes for children and young people.
I think just now, Shirley, I think there's a huge amount of pressure in the system, as we already know, about people working incredibly hard just in this recovery phase. But it's just, I suppose, reminding people that, you know, meal times are happening every day, snack times are happening in schools in a natural environment every day, and it's about maybe using those to look through a lens of what is actually happening, you know, and using those current existing opportunities rather than always seeing potentially things and new evaluation processes as another thing, an add-on, that there's a real opportunity to use the knowledge that is already happening.
Something that strikes me, and I think we've got to be careful not to overlook, was that during the period of the return to school, but where things were still not normal, children were eating in classrooms, in small bubbles, often with their teachers, spending more time with their peers. There were also children who were eating in dining rooms, but on a more staggered basis. So the feedback that I was getting, and I think this maybe came, Jerry, through some work that Assist had done, and it was really, children were saying that actually these were things that they enjoyed. They enjoyed spending time with a significant adult in their classroom eating together. They enjoyed the less frenetic lunch times that we've all probably seen in schools. And I think in that rush back to the normal, we mustn't overlook some of these things that actually have been positives as a result of the things that the changes and the innovations that you've had to make in terms of managing lunch times and meal times for children in school. And I think that's really key, that we've always said that the way that we work around food in schools, so much of food is to do with the relationship you have with food, but also the relationship that you have with the people that you eat with. And that's really important. And I think actually making lunch times as much part of that whole learning across the school day is really key, that it shouldn't be seen as something separate. It's as much a part of it's an important part of a child's day, but there's so much that can be learned by the child and by the adults around the children as well. So is anybody going to be brave enough to put anything in there in terms of what might help you in terms of taking this forward within your schools? Or would you rather just leave it and get in touch with us separately? And I think I notice further up, sorry, that Ken has kindly put the link in the chat to the self-evaluation framework. And within the self-evaluation framework, you will find the sketch notes. They were on the screen very briefly there. I see somebody's mentioned, Mr. Boyd's mentioned fair trade didn't seem to get a mention on the sketch notes, but maybe you missed it. I'm not entirely sure we mentioned everything in the sketch notes, Mr. Boyd. They're very they're a way to introduce a discussion. So I think if fair trade is an issue that you have that you'd like to talk about in your school, that would be the focus you would use using the sketch notes as the way to introduce that to everybody. So it's not that things are included or excluded, they're really more as a trigger for what's important in the context in which you're working. Well, that's lovely. Sinead Blackie saying about, yeah, the children have enjoyed their time in their small bubbles. Yeah. And I don't know how you feel about that moving forward, whether that's something that you would potentially be able to build on. I don't mean every day, but whether there are opportunities to use that knowledge that you now have about the way children enjoyed eating in small groups to potentially, include that in other opportunities later on. Okay, well, we just leave it there then. If everybody's okay with that, and you know how to access both the nutritional regulations, which you can Google, and the link is there for the self-evaluation framework. That's lovely. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Jerry and Emma. Cheers.